Solar energy is one of the few primary energy sources that is suitable for large-scale use in a carbon-constrained world. The limitation in carbon and the restriction that can cause the harmful effect in the environment. To prevent the use of carbon and the ambitious goal for most developed countries to become a net zero carbon emission or carbon free countries, due to that, the importance of the solar energy is gradually increasing. And the solar photovoltaic that accounted for approximately 0.8% of the global electricity production in 2013 and approximately 140 gigawatt of installed peak capacity. The given current estimate that as much of 25,000 gigawatt of zero carbon energy that will be required by 2050, merely a span of 38 years, to achieve the international community goal of avoiding those dangerous anthropogenic interference with the Earth climate. The PV deployment could be called upon to scale up by 1 to 2 orders of magnitude by mid-century. Predicting the future trajectory, the estimated energy ecosystem and the transition of energy sources for any technology that involved with is very difficult to shift, and the PV is no exception. That is, one hand, that the PV capacity worldwide has grown as roughly 47% per year since 2001, a trend that if it were naively projected into the nature and for the future, it would suggest that the world electricity demand will be satisfied within the next 12 to 15 years for a more realistic approach and those analyses that are involved with. The availability of 3 categories of resources, that is the land, commodity materials and the critical elements that are required for a large-scale PV deployment. No serious resource constraint on large-scale deployment of concentrating the solar power and the other major solar energy technology that consider that land does not present a significant obstruction to the large-scale PV deployment, and we evaluate the potential constraint with respect to the commodity material and also the critical element that using a target deployment of 12.5 terawatt of photovoltaic capacity. The amount needed to supply roughly 50% of the world projected electricity demand in the year 2050, with a possible exception of the flat glass production, which would have been ramped up, and that can be the commodity material requirement would not constrain the large-scale PV deployment over 35 years from 2015 to 2050. The technology, particularly the commercial thin film technology that employ the specific, often scarce an element that cannot be replaced without fundamentally altering the technology, may face the deployment ceiling due to the material constraint. The powerful computer model to simulate the effect of a large volume of the solar PV that connected to the distribution of network, several locations and network configuration, that the intermittent PV generation changes power flow pattern in the grid architecture and causing the local problem that may require the network upgrades and the modification. The proximity of those generator in PV cell that end user may reduce some network investment cost as well as some other resistive electricity losses. Mismatches between the load and solar generation in terms of the location and the time may reduce or even cancel their potential benefits, the strongly suggest that revision are needed in the method used to calculate both the allowed remuneration of those regulated distribution companies and the network charges imposed on user of the distribution infrastructure. Even if the PV generation becomes competitive at low levels of penetration, what important that the very large scale deployment of solar PV will make it increasingly necessary to curtail the solar productions and the other zero variable cost production for economic reasons, in particular to avoid costly cycling of the thermal power plant. The coordination of the solar production and the storage that reduce the cycling requirement for the thermal plant on the system and enhance the solar capacity value. So what important that even if the solar PV generation becomes competitive at the low levels of penetration, that substantial scale up of the PV deployment that will reduce the per kilowatt profitability of installed PV capacity until a system dependent break-even point is reached, beyond which further investment in solar PV are not longer profitable. The PV technology that employs some scarce element may encounter a deployment ceiling due to the limits on cumulative productions, and for examples of such elements include silicon, tellurium and gallium, indium and selenium. All these are the commodity material. In this critical material, they have few, if any, substitute in a given PV technology. In most cases, they have a part of the light absorbing and charge transporting layer.
Probability of reaching a target. Probability of reaching a target. Probability of reaching a target. Acquisition on target. Acquisition on target. Acquisition on target.
Electrical contact on those silicon solar cell. At present, the critical material, the exception of silicon and silver that are produced, are relatively minor byproduct during the production of other metals. Substantially, those increasing the output of this critical material would require either extracting such material more efficiently from the primary ores of the other metal through changes to refining the methods or producing them as a primary product. The historical growth of the global metal production informed the chances of achieving terawatt-scale PV deployment by mid-century using the material-constrained PV technologies. That's all for now. Thanks for your time. See you in the next video.